Hi, this is no Photoshop. The PC12 from Faderfox is a MIDI controller for both hardware and software instruments. Its most striking feature is the 72 pots or knobs. But it actually has a lot more under the hood. In this setup, I've configured the top 3 rows to control Arturia's Minimoog emulator, and the bottom 3 control their Oberheim SEM virtual synth. The PC12 also has 12 buttons, we'll get to them in a bit, and one encoder which you can program as well. Once the encoders or pots are assigned, you can control the synth without it being on screen. So here I'm back to controlling the virtual Minimoog using the top 3 rows. In terms of connectivity, the PC12 is USB powered and supports MIDI in and out on USB, and it has 2 MIDI ins, 2 MIDI outs, 5-pin DIN, and 1 extension port for additional Faderfox devices. The Faderfox PC12 comes with a template for controlling Ableton Live, which turns it into a sort of 12-track mixer.
Do not stand at my grave and weep.
The layout is parallel to Ableton. Each track is represented by a column. The top 4 rows are effects sends.
I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am gentle autumn rain. When you wake in the morning, hush. I am the swift.
And below you've got pan and volume. So what you're seeing here, this configuration of knobs and buttons and encoders, that's one setup. And you can store up to 30 such setups on this device. So one setup can control the mixer, another setup can control your soft synths, and a completely different setup can control hardware synthesizers or devices all simultaneously. The buttons can be programmed too.
Do not stand.
Here are their track mutes. You can quickly switch between setups, and that's both for controlling internal devices as well as external ones. Let me show you a setup for controlling a hardware synthesizer. I like demonstrating this on the circuit because its lights will show you incoming commands. Each PC12 row corresponds to a synth. Each light corresponds to a change that a knob is making. The top row is synth 1 and the bottom row is synth 2. And you can see that each change I make on the PC12 corresponds to a change in the sound and in the hardware synth. And this is a good opportunity to introduce a really nice feature of the PC12, which is preset snapshots. So you notice what just happened? I can mess around with the parameters either on the circuit or on the PC12, and boom, reset to a previously stored snapshot or preset. And you can store up to 30 such snapshots. This is different from the setups. These are knob positions rather than knob programmings. So while we're on that topic, let me show you how to program the PC12. Let's start with the basics. To switch setups, there's a shortcut. You hit the red button and any number between 1 to 10. This is my Ableton setup, which is based on a template provided by Faderfox. This is the same as I showed you before. Buttons control the mutes, as we saw before. And the shift shortcut works for the group of 10 setups you're looking at. There are 30 setups in total, but if I want a quick swap, just hit the shift or red button and any button between 1 and 10 to quickly jump to the relevant setup. And you can see now I've moved from controlling Ableton to controlling my synth. Notice as I change the knobs on the PC12, the corresponding lights reflect these changes on the circuit, and there are over 50 such parameters on the circuit, so it's nice to have everything in one place on the PC12. Now saving snapshots is easy. Long press blue and the slot you want to save in, and you're done. I'll create another snapshot which just turns off all the lights just to make this really clear on the 2 synths, and then long press blue and slot 5. And now with blue and short press, I can toggle between the 2 snapshots. Look at the circuit. You'll see all the lights change across the circuit as I swap between the presets, and that's it. You can also create snapshots within Ableton or your soft synth. I'll change to my Ableton preset and then set the knobs all, let's say, in one direction, just so you'll see it very clearly. Save this as a snapshot, shift long press with blue till the lights turn on. Then go the other way around. Note how the levers in Ableton also correspond to the changes with the knobs. Long press blue and a new preset slot, saved, and watch the levels go up and down as I change presets. Before we go into how to set up the controller, there's a monitor mode. If you hit Shift and the 11 button, then typically you'll see just the CC values going out, but if you hit Shift and 11 again, you'll be able to see which channels are being sent out. Those are those arrows to the top and to the right, and then this style of arrow will show you which channel information is coming in on. A nice tool. Okay, so there are 4 modes to the PC12. There's Edit mode, there's Setup mode, and then Shift Blue gets us back to Control mode, and then Shift Encoder gets us into MIDI Learn mode. So those are the 4 modes. Let's go through them one by one. Edit mode lets you program all of the encoders and buttons directly from the machine. So you don't need a computer to do this. You can just do everything here through the hardware. Editing is actually pretty easy. You first select what you want to edit, and there are 2 ways to do that. The first is click this button, and then using the encoder, select which knob or button you want to change. So P is for pot, 1 and A is the first row, and then B is the second row, C is the third row, and so on. Then you have the push button and the encoder, that's this thing here, and then you have the 12 buttons. So you select what you want to edit, and a quicker way is just to hold the blue button and touch the knob you want to edit. This way is much easier, of course. And now that we've selected the item that we want to edit, we can use the bottom row of buttons as sort of like a menu. Each of the buttons on the bottom from 2 till 8 handle a different property of the encoder or the button. This way you don't need external software to change the different parameters. Now I won't go through all the parameters. The important ones are that you can designate if each button or knob will be a note or CC. It can also be a program change or aftertouch. Those are the options for the buttons. The encoders or pots can be note, CC, program change, pitch bend, and aftertouch. You can determine if when you move a knob, the parameters will either jump or snap. This determines if the encoder needs to catch up with the current value before it starts making changes. You can select the individual MIDI channel for each and every little button individually, which is really nice. This is where you select the note or CC channel. It's all actually labeled on the interface quite nicely, and you've got low and high, minimum and maximum numbers if you want to change that. A nice touch they added here to make a lot of changes at once is if you want to change a whole row, all you need to do is long press a parameter. So here I'm changing an entire row from note to CC. The leftmost knob was copied across the row. Okay, so that was edit mode. Let's have a look at setup. Shift blue will move us into setup mode. Here I'm on setup 5. There are 30 total. Now, since I messed up setup 1, which was an Ableton setup, setup 30 is the factory preset. I can copy that by long press on copy. And there we go, it's copied. And then if I want to paste that, I go back to setup number 1 and then hit paste, hold it until the lights blink, and that's it. Now setup 30 is copied into setup number 1. So that's copy paste. Button 1 in setup mode lets you choose your setup. And button 2 lets you select your MIDI routings. Now remember, there are 4 inputs and 4 outputs, and here you can control, if you see the dots, you're controlling timing. If you don't see them, you're controlling MIDI data like note and CC. And you configure this based on the labeling. So you choose which of the ins goes to which of the outs. So for example, let's configure MIDI out number 1 for notes and CC for non-timing data. It can be N, which means no routing. 1 is from MIDI in 1, U, USB, and E is the extension port. It takes a little bit to wrap your head around this, but basically this is how you can configure both timing when the dots appear, as well as regular routing of MIDI data. You can get to some pretty complex both timing and MIDI routing. If you want to learn more, just have a look at the manual. I won't go more in depth into that here. I'll just reset things to the way they were, and we will move on. So next is the special menu. This is setup option number 3. The idea of this button is to save you work by copying either columns or rows here, duplicating these 2 across the board, these 3 across the board, or 4 columns. You can do the same for rows, duplicate 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows. Just saves you a lot of knob twiddling. The same functionality for control changes also increases the channel as it copies. The next setup options are copy and paste. We already talked about those. You can reset either the current setup or all of them. You can send a sysex of all the setups or just the one you're currently on, and you can receive them as well. Shift and blue will exit out of setup. And the last mode is MIDI Learn. You get into it by clicking Shift and pressing the encoder. And the idea here is to assign controls by detecting and intercepting incoming MIDI commands. It's super simple to do this. You just hit Shift and press the encoder while selecting the pot that you want to learn. So Shift, hold, select, turn the knob on the synth, get confirmation on the PC12 screen, and you're good to go. Now, you could go ahead and do this knob after knob, but if the CC commands on your synth are in a sequence, you can do this with one step. And you do this by selecting the rightmost column and turning the knob right when you're hitting Shift Learn. Hit the rightmost knob on your synth, and then all of the encoders will be programmed automatically in a sequential order. So, in conclusion, I think that having functions accessible, meaning you don't have to page through screens or dig through menus, is important in music making. If you have a soft synth with a lot of options, or a hardware synth with a lot of options, like the Electron devices, and this pairs really nicely with the Mark 1s and the Octatrack Mark II, the Faderfox PC12 is highly recommended as a way of discovering things you may not have otherwise reached on your synth. That plus the snapshot functionality makes this device extremely interesting. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments below. If you like this video, hit like. Thanks very much for watching.